Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the places at Hawk Blogger. And as you can probably tell by my backdrop, I'm in a sunny location today. Still out in Palm Springs with my family for the week, so enjoying that. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying a little bit of that sunshine in my background because I know it's not that way right now up there in the Northwest. But going to be a pretty quick show today. I'm going to do a couple things here, and it's going to be pretty quick shows probably all week, although I will be able to let you know Thursday morning, Dane Brugler will be back for his second appearance with us. So looking forward to talking with Dane ahead of the Combine, so keep an eye out on that. But we're going to do two things in this show today. Number one, we are going to take any questions you've got in live chat. So normally we reserve those for super chats and folks that have been Patreon members, and we answer those questions on Real Hawk Talk. Today, if you have any questions for me on any topic, feel free to ask in chat and I will get to those. First, though, we are going to go over one specific part of this free agent class, because the reason this comes up for me is that any year that you're trying to make over your roster, you're looking for a few things. The one thing you're looking for in every year are market inefficiencies. Now, what are market inefficiencies? Market inefficiencies are when there is maybe a chance for you to get higher value than what you spend, higher return on your investment. Great example of this where the Seahawks got an amazing exploitation of a market inefficiency was back in 2013 when they signed Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett in free agency for very, very low bargain deals that would end up being an absolute key, the final piece to what became a Super Bowl roster. There are a lot of factors related to lockout and CBA and some other things going on during that offseason that really depressed defensive line values, and they were able to take advantage of that with some short-term deals, especially the one with Michael Bennett, which they didn't expect to be able to sign. This year, the reason I see that there's a market inefficiency is the defensive line group in this draft is as deep as it's ever been. You will hear this from every single draft analyst that of their top 50, 20, 25 of them are defensive linemen. Top 100, significant chunk are defensive linemen. The number of people invited to the Combine that are defensive linemen is either a record or close to it. Well, what does that mean? That means that a lot of teams are coming to terms with the fact that there's going to be some young, cheap, talented defensive linemen available to pretty much every team in this draft, and probably multiple times during this draft. They might be able to draft multiple talented young defensive linemen. So what does that mean for the Seahawks? It means that the Seahawks and any other team, they're probably going to be less willing to sign defensive linemen in free agency than they would have before, because why spend free agent dollars when you could get a rookie contract? The other thing that's going to happen is you may see more cap casualties because, again, teams are going to look at the guys that are on their team and say, is it worth us paying this person that price, or should we go and get a cheaper defensive lineman in the draft? Well, it just so happens that there's this other thing going on this year. The free agents on the defensive line are plentiful as well. So now you've got a double barrel supply issue for these free agents, where not only are they and their agents going to have to be fighting a really deep draft class that is bargain basement prices, but they're also going to have to be fighting a very deep free agent class, which is going to further make it difficult for them to command top dollar. And what does that all add up to? It means there's going to be some teams that get just crazy deals on defensive line free agents this offseason. And it's a rare thing. It's not going to happen every year. Big men who move fast and are physical and talented don't generally come along that often. And that's why in usual draft classes, you may not see a defensive tackle taken until the second round in many cases. So Very unique situation. I'm going to talk about a couple names that kind of stand out to me. Some of these are names that if you watched Jeff Simmons and I do our free agents, our top 10 free agents, it'll be some of the same names that come up in this one. But the point here is, I think some of these guys may end up being bargains. Now, not all of these guys are going to be Seahawks targets. I'll talk about a few off the jump. They may or may not be, but I will bring up a few names. So while I'm doing this, make sure you give the show a like, click subscribe. I would appreciate it. And also drop your questions into chat. I'm not sure I will get to every single one of them, but I'll do my best. So feel free to queue up those questions. And once I'm done going through the defensive line, free agent bargains, I will go back and look at your questions in chat, and I will do my best to answer them. All right, so let's get into it. One of the first names on this list is an interesting one because it's also someone who is coming into free agency with the highest contract value of any of the defensive linemen who will be entering free agency. His name is DeMarcus Lawrence. You've probably heard of him. He is a 33-year-old defensive lineman for the Dallas Cowboys. And he only played in 4 games this year for the Cowboys because he had what's called a Liz Frank injury to his foot and missed the remainder of the season. There are some that believe that he is going to be the top edge rusher available on the market. I'm not so sure. With his age, with his injury, and I think with guys like Josh Sweat and with what's going on in the free agent, the draft class that's coming up, I'm not as confident that DeMarcus Lawrence is going to have the high salary that he probably would hope that he would. I also wonder, the reason I bring this up at all related to the Seahawks, Adam Dirty recruited Jonathan Hankins from the Cowboys last year to come and play for him. Is there a chance he's going to do the same thing with DeMarcus Lawrence? I think it depends a little bit on a number of factors. If he's going to really command a high price deal, then I don't think it's really an option. If he's going to be around $10 million a year, which I don't think is crazy, I think it could become possible, especially if the Seahawks decide to move on from Uchenna Nwosu, we just talked to Joel Corey yesterday, and we know that there's likely a process going on right now to renegotiate his deal, given the injuries that he's had over the past couple of years and the contract that they paid him. We also know Draymond Jones, likely to be someone who is either off the team or has a significant restructure. And one of the things that DeMarcus Lawrence is known for at this time in his career is being an elite run defender, an elite edge setter. And if you were to tell me, like, the Seahawks let go of Draymond Jones and Uchenna Nwosu, and that they signed DeMarcus Lawrence, I would not think you were crazy. I think that there is a possible future where that happens. I don't think it's the most likely. I wouldn't even say it's a 50-50 chance. But I do think that his name is a good example of a quality player later in his career who could potentially be available to the Seahawks or another team. I think Dan Quinn might be someone who comes knocking, as he also knows him from his time in Dallas. So that's an example of the kind of guy who maybe in an average year, big name, has been a highly productive player. Maybe he's really pushing the envelope on what he can get in terms of a salary deal. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets had by a team for much less than what people would expect. Another name, and what you're going to kind of notice in some of these cases are, I think the older the player, the more likely they're going to be available for a lower than market price. Because again, draft is not only cheap, it's youth. And so when I say like Josh Sweat will be a free agent, Josh Sweat's going to be, he's 27, 28 years old. I don't think his market value is going to be affected that much. DeMarcus Lawrence at 33, I do think his market will be affected. Another name, and this is another guy that the Seahawks have familiarity with, at least having played against him a number of times. He comes from the Denver Broncos. He's a defensive tackle, formerly of the 49ers. His name is DJ Jones. He is 30 years old. He is a disruptor in the middle of the line. He's a guy that signed a big deal with the Broncos, averaging $10 million a year. I don't think he's going to get that this time around. I think his price is going to be less than that. I don't think his production has warranted that level of contract. And I think somebody's going to get a pretty affordable, high quality interior defensive lineman in this free agent class. So DJ Jones is another name. Now, Jarran Reed qualifies on this list. Jarran Reed, if this was any other season, I don't think there'd be a question. I think the Seahawks re-sign Jarran Reed. He is, despite the fact that he's 32 years old, he was extremely productive for the Seahawks last year. He was a leader in that room. Everybody loves him. Byron Young follows him around like a puppy. And those two are really tight. There's every reason in most situations for the Seahawks to get him back. Jarran Reed wants to play here. He wants to retire in Seattle. And his price is probably going to be affordable. The question becomes, is that really where the Seahawks want to spend their dollars, even if they have the ability to do so, because maybe they want to create some space for Byron Murphy to be getting the snaps that Jarran Reed was. And is it really what Jarran Reed wants to do to come here and get 250 snaps the way Byron Murphy did last year? So I think that's a name that someone is going to get a good bargain on. It very likely could be the Seahawks, but it could also be another team. I think it wouldn't shock me. Jarran Reed signed for $4.5 million per year, his 2-year deal, average $4.5 million. It wouldn't surprise me if his deal is less than that, even though he's had a 2-year stretch with the Seahawks that was really productive. So he's another guy that I put on that list. Next, a guy that I like, I think is just going to bargain in general, Greg Gaines. He's younger. He is 27, going to be 28. He had a deal with the Bucs paying him $3.5 million. I think, again, you're going to be able to get a guy that is a really quality run stuffer who occasionally can be a pocket presser in the middle of the line. At $3.5 million last year, I think you could be talking about another deal of that range or less. So you hear what I'm saying? Like, you're talking about guys that are going to be, some of these guys could be $3 to $5 million for a quality rotational player, a quality starter. Normally those guys would be commanding more. And that was a deal that he got when there wasn't this market inefficiency going on. So maybe it is even less than it was then. Another name I would pull up for you, Kevin Givens, who 28 years old, had his kind of career year for the 49ers last year. He was paid $2 million. I think he had 6 or 7 sacks. He eventually got injured, but again, interior defensive lineman, had previously been known largely as a run defender, and now has started to add pass rush to his repertoire. He's an interesting younger player that could be had by somebody who's looking around. Another couple of names before I get to your questions. Poona Ford, 29 years old. Poona Ford was paid under $2 million last year, $1.7 million. I don't think you're going to get him that cheap after the year he had for the Chargers in that defense that is very similar to what Mike McDonald runs. Poona Ford's a guy that may make a lot of sense for the Seahawks to revisit. In a lot of ways, I think Poona Ford is a better fit for what the Seahawks need than Jarran Reed. I think Byron Murphy can fill a lot of what Jarran Reed did. They don't have a classic nose tackle, knowing that Jonathan Hankins is going to be a free agent and very unlikely to be back at his age. They need a nose tackle, and Poona Ford can play that role. He also does other things pretty well, and he's still 29, so he's a guy that you could probably get for the next 3 or 4 years at a pretty affordable price. I think he's a good example of a guy that in any other year, I wouldn't be surprised if Poona Ford pushes 7, 8, 9 million per year. Like, I don't think that's crazy given the year he had and the fact that he's still younger than 30, under 30 years old. This year, I think it might be closer to 5 per year. And we'll kind of see whether the Seahawks decide to knock on the door of their old friend, Poona Ford. Another couple names that I'll throw out there. We won't talk about LJ Collier. Milton Williams is a good example of somebody who's not going to be cheap. It doesn't matter what the deal is. He's earned himself top dollar. I think he'll be the top paid defensive lineman in this free agent market. Another name that for me stands out is Bobby Brown III from the Rams. Bobby Brown is 24 years old. 24 years old, 330-pound nose tackle, still developing, had a solid season for the Rams. He is not a pass rusher. He is a run stuffer. And I think it would almost be ideal for the Seahawks to be able to sign him, not only because it pulls him away from the Rams, but because it takes nose tackle off the list for the foreseeable future. And he pairs perfectly with Byron Murphy for the next few years and really frees them up in the draft to just kind of take wherever they feel like there is the best value. They don't have to feel like they have to address the interior defensive line in terms of losing guys like Jonathan Hankins and potentially guys like Jaron Reed. So Bobby Brown is probably tops on my list for guys that I think would be really interesting for the Seahawks to explore. And then the last name I will give you, Roy Lopez. 27 years old, played for the Cardinals last year. I think he is one of the more underrated names as a run stuffer on the interior of a defensive line. He was a big reason why the Cardinals were able to really improve as a run defense last year. And I think he's a really interesting name. This is a guy that got paid $1 million last year. $1 million last year. I think that he has the potential to be a really solid starter for the next few years, right at the perfect age. And again, this is not a guy that most teams are going to look at and say, oh, Roy Lopez, we can't get that guy in the draft. So his value may not be much more than what he got paid last year. Most likely, he probably gets a sweetheart deal. The Cardinals give him a sweetheart deal to stay home with them. But he's a guy that, again, you could steal from a division rival and potentially do some good for your interior defensive line as well. All right, so those are some names of bargain free agent defensive linemen that I think could be available and potentially could be of interest to the Seahawks. You notice that almost all of them were interior defensive linemen. The edge market in free agency is not nearly as interesting as the defensive tackle market. You'll also notice that most of those guys are run stuffers. They are more of a run defender than they are a pass rusher, which again reduces their value even more. And so with that in mind, I think it would make a lot of sense for the Seahawks to look as part of their overall offseason plans. Can we pick out a younger, high quality nose tackle that's a run stuffer and knock that off our list so we don't have to worry about using a 4th or 5th round pick or a 3rd round pick or whatever it is on a young nose tackle, can actually use that on a quarterback or another position where maybe you want to add to later, that or a fullback or something else that you might not be able to get in free agency. So quick tour through that. Let me take a look at your questions, and we will put these up here. So get a lot of people saying good morning, and good morning to all of you as well. If you haven't given the show a like and click subscribe, please do that. All right, here's first question. Comes from Trevor Stewenberg. Says, what's the best way to get into draft content? Who are the best content creators? Well, I think one of the best ways to get into draft content is to use some of the mock draft simulators. And I think the PFF1 is the best one to start with, because not only do you get to go through and have the list of names, but you can click on the names, learn about the players, learn where they're strong, or at least based off of PFF. It's a good place to start, and it gives you something to kind of assess things by and whether you like that size player and those pieces. As far as like content creators and places to pay attention, I think Todd McShay's podcast is really solid. The Todd McShay Show, I'd look that up. The Athletic football show with Robert Mays, who's obviously been a guest of ours for a long time, is great, and he brings on Dane Brugler. So anytime Dane Brugler is on any show, you should listen, including ours, in a couple of days. I like Ryan Fowler from the Draft Network, who's also been on with our show a few times. So the Draft Network has a number of guys. I tend to think that Ryan does the best job and really like his stuff. Matt Miller is a guy for ESPN. Unfortunately, he's a 49ers fan, so I think that skews a lot of his takes. But I think Matt does generally a pretty good job in his draft evals. And then you can also play around with NFL Mock Draft Database.com. And one of the things that's cool about that site is that anyone that does mock drafts, that has a big board, things of that nature, they'll compile them there. So you can kind of look through and see where there's some different names. And if you want some people that have very different perspectives, like Chris Trapasso, of CBS Sports. I appreciate his kind of off the beats perspective. I think I saw a recent top 50, unless it was a mistake, that he had James Pierce Jr. as his number one player on the board ahead of Abdul Carter. So yeah, he does some things that are a little bit different, but really like seek out people that have different opinions than what everyone else does. If I didn't say Daniel Jeremiah already, obviously, Move the Sticks podcast with him and Bucky Brooks is fantastic. 100% recommend that. There's a bunch more. Trevor Stickema is on the PFF podcast. I listen to him as well. So listen to different people's takes. I would also look at Arif Hassan's content. He's got who's had the most accurate mock drafts in past years. I think that is instructive because it gives you some idea of who's actually been on target. I think Joel Klatt is really good in terms of he has a lot of college football coverage that he does as part of his job and a lot of insights, especially related to Mike Macdonald. So those are all some names that I would recommend. All right. Great question from Trevor. Next question. This comes from Matthew McManus. Have you looked at the receiver free agent market yet? Anyone stand out, particularly downfield threats? I'll do another show on free agent receivers. My general take on what I saw from the free agent receiver market is a lot of veterans, a lot of guys like Tyler Lockett, like Amari Cooper and DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown, and these are all guys in their 30s that don't really have the same production that they once did, kind of more possession receivers than they used to be. And, I'm not so sure that if all things are equal, that you wouldn't rather have Tyler Lockett back than most of those guys, even though some of them have more recognizable names to the general NFL community. So I didn't see a bunch of particularly intriguing free agent wide receiver targets, but I'll take another look. And it's a good question, Matt. All right. Here we go. See if there's any other question. Any news on combine credentials? This is a funny thing. So, I mean, part of my experience, covering the team now 365 days a year and being credentialed with the Seahawks is learning how this works. I just, in the last few months, got approved by the NFL Players Association for access to that site as a credentialed media member. I don't think that was anything wrong. That's just like, a little slow moving. The way it works for these NFL events is you apply for credentials, and then the deadline to apply for credentials was just Saturday, the 15th. And yesterday was a holiday, and they will not tell you if you get credentials until the next few days. This week sometime we will find out. And the combine's next week. I've got tickets and a hotel booked because I couldn't wait until this week to make those plans, and won't know until sometime this week if those get approved. Hopefully they do. If they don't, I can't say I'll be that sad to be able to spend the week at home instead of traveling, but hopefully they do get approved and we get to do that. Give you guys a lot of firsthand experience in the combine and cover it as closely as possible. And obviously ask Mike Macdonald and John Schneider questions at their press conference. All right. Since the defensive tackle class is so large this year, shouldn't we spend our free agent money on the interior offensive line? I think that's a perfectly reasonable alternative path, and that's my default answer. I think it would be wise in some ways to add a couple of free agent interior offensive linemen and then really free yourself up to potentially benefit from the defensive line class in this draft. But don't know. I mean, everyone's going to be looking for free agent linemen and don't know what that market's going to be. I think that market will be much more, it's the opposite of the defensive line group. Even if there's some supply, demand is so out of control that it's going to be hard to get a reasonable price for a free agent interior offensive lineman. So we'll see. But yeah, I certainly think that that's a reasonable way to to go. Did I say Byron Young? I meant Byron Murphy. I did. All right. Okay. Here's a question. What about trade from Daniel 444? What about trading within the D line to bag Hall from Tampa Bay? Trading within the D line to bag Hall from Tampa Bay. Don't know if I understand that question. Apologies. All right. This is a question from Ed Chan. Brian, any plans to have an in-depth scheme episode on Kubiak, maybe from Griff or Coach Cody? Thanks as always. Yeah, we're definitely going to bring Coach Cody back soon. And we're going to actually have Griff on this weekend with Rob Staten, and then something came up and he had to jump off. So yeah, we'll definitely have Griff on again soon. I'm looking forward to talking with him. Question from 12 for Life. Who are your stick and pick players if they're available at 18 so far? Right now, those guys would be, and some of these names are going to sound wild, but they're just kind of all over the place in terms of where people think they're going to go. So Armand Membu is near the top of my list. Will Campbell is on that list as well. And some people have him as a top 5 pick. Other people have him going in the 20s. I think Will Campbell would be a fantastic addition to the interior if he's available. I would put Shamar Stewart probably on that list as of right now. I don't know if I go much beyond that. Kelvin Banks is probably on that list. I'm pretty enthusiastic about what he could be as an interior offensive lineman. There might be a couple others, but those are the ones that really come to mind for me right away. Tyler Warren is close, but I'm just not totally sure he's a stick and pick for sure, but I think he'd be a fantastic add if he was there. So those are a couple different names. Good question. All right. I'm going to take a couple more here. Hawk Maniac says, what resources do team use to determine a player's trade value? I think it varies by team, but a lot of that is determined by like going to the NFL Combine, going to the Senior Bowl, and talking to other execs. So they will talk to execs not necessarily about their own players, but what are you hearing so-and-so is looking for this guy? And then they triangulate and talk to 3 or 4 or 5 other people to get a feel for what the asking price is. They also talk to agents because the agents have some feel, because the agents are also trying to figure that out. And so a lot of the way that people assess trade value or what the asking price will be is to ask around. I think that's a primary way. Now, whether or not they're willing to pay, if you're trying to say, how do they determine what they're willing to assess that value to? I think it's like anything else. They're looking at how much that player can add to the team, what his age is he ascending? Is he a scheme fit? What's his contract cost? What's his contract situation? You're gonna have to re-sign and extend to this person. And then also, what's the availability? What's the supply of players of similar value or similar traits, either in the draft or free agency or via trade? All those things factor into what you're willing to give up for a player. All right, folks, I'm going to drop it there. Thank you so much for your questions. I will probably take some more tomorrow and would appreciate a like and subscribe. And I will see you then. Until then, this has been episode 330 straight days of Hawk Blogger Mornings, bringing you fresh Seahawks content. I'm Brian Nemhauser. Have a wonderful rest of your day.